Greetings, happy Friday. Welcome to the Steve Deace Show here on CRTV, the television edition. Of course, as always, we love to know what you think about what we think. Steve@stevedeace.com is the email address. You can like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter at Steve Deace Show. Kim, Todd, Aaron, we've got a full house as we get set for the Deace Group. It is the Deace Group Roundtable. We begin here on the Steve Deace Show with issue 1. Trump declares war on conservatives.
I have to stay true to my principles also. And I'm a conservative, but don't forget, this is called the Republican Party. It's not called the Conservative Party. You know, there are conservative parties. This is called the Republican Party. I am a conservative.
Well, those were the good old days when Trump was declaring himself a conservative. Now, he's declaring war on conservatives. Multiple tweets Trump has published in the aftermath of his crushing healthcare defeat have made it clear conservatives, true conservatives, the ones who fight, are no friend of his.
It certainly was an interesting period of time. We all learned a lot. We learned a lot about loyalty.
If the people Trump is attacking and criticizing now are not welcome at his negotiating table, Trump has very few allies in Washington.
First question, Kim, this is going to go to you. I am not surprised that President Trump has crossed this line. Sadly, it's everything I predicted we would eventually see during the campaign. I'm sure that you're probably not surprised.
I'm not surprised.
I am, however, very surprised he was dumb and clumsy enough to cross this line this early. We haven't even yet reached day 70. And a good con man will wait until the most opportune time to let everybody in on the con, right?
Wait, you mean he wouldn't do it right with Obamacare, one of the biggest promises that he had across the country?
Now, this, I think, is a foolish tactical move. Mm-hmm. He pressed against conservatives from a position of weakness, from a position of disadvantage, with a Rhino Care bill that had a 17% approval rating, and now you're in that tart territory when you're looking at legislation that is that unpopular, and he's pressing against a lot of guys like Thomas Massie or Justin Amash from Grand Rapids, Michigan, where I grew up, so I know that district very well. These guys are from districts that are more conservative than they are Trumpian. They're in districts that, unless they get caught with farm animals on the internet, nothing Donald Trump says about them will cost them a seat or probably 1% of the vote. I thought it was, regardless of what you think of Trump, I'm not surprised he went there. I do think it's a surprise he was dumb enough to go there this early. What say you?
This early. You know, this is one of those times when I didn't want to be right.
I've been saying that a lot for pretty much the last, 60 days.
Right? I mean, you wanted him to actually exceed the expectations of what he did when he was campaigning, but obviously he is not. The fact that he would go there and take on the Freedom Caucus and then actually help us out by saying, look, this is the Republican Party, not the Conservative Party. So that helps us a little bit, but I know a lot of people conflate those two issues, or two ideas. So this is discouraging.
Todd, you surprised Trump was dumb enough tactically to go there already?
No, I think that's where his heart is. And listen, I'm starting to wonder, how on earth did this guy take $1 million of his daddy's money and become the King Kong of New York? I mean, the man is just incompetent. Mike Flynn, gone.
Yeah, we ended up having a guy who was a foreign agent for a Muslim dictator, national security advisor.
And now looks ready to roll for immunity. Reince Priebus's two toadies have already been fired in less than 70 days. I mean, all the best people, not by a long shot. This is already, I mean, really, I don't know. There's been failed presidencies before. I can't even imagine a presidency that even comes close to this level of failure in the first 70 days.
Other than William Henry Harrison dying in the first 70 days, I think this is the worst we've seen. And the one hire that he has made that has actually elevated his stock is Jeff Sessions, who, of course, is the guy that has enforced the immigration laws up to a point. I think he could go even further than he has gone. was the guy that stepped in on the trainee madness in the bathrooms and whether they were going to get rid of that Obama tried to impose on the schools. Take those two things away that Sessions is spearheading or took the lead or was the tip of the spear on, and where would this administration be without those two things? Where would it be without Jeff Sessions, for example? Where would it be?
No kidding. And when I go back to what I said about where his heart truly is, we need to then come back and talk about ourselves, our conservative movement, the one who bought this thing, hook, line, and sinker. He's going to build a wall. He's going to shake up the system. He's going to drain the swamp. The fact that you have all been played and played so hard
And so early.
Yes, it's as much as it's a Trump problem, it's an even bigger you problem.
Would say you, Aaron?
I completely agree with that. Todd just hit the nail on the head. This is going back and looking at some of the things that Trump said last year during the election and in the lead up to the election. Whenever he talked about him being a conservative, it was never a roundabout, I am conservative. It was, I'm a common sense conservative, or I'm a conservative, but you hear that all the time, and the fact that so many people have foisted this mantra of conservatism on him, Todd is exactly right. That's on you. That's not on Trump. But it's just unfortunate that we had to learn this lesson again the hard way.
You know, I mentioned on yesterday's show, Kim, that I thought Trump crossed a line. And I thought, and I explained just a minute ago, I think that crossing that line was a mistake. Just to put a finer point on that, I got a text yesterday from a good friend of mine who's pretty well connected in the conservative movement, and he said, you know, I've been walking a fine line when I'm asked publicly in the media or privately amongst activists about Trump, because I've got a payroll to meet like just about every other conservative or libertarian group has, and the donors, they don't want us to go after him. He said the donors don't want to basically believe, to borrow the term that he used in our text exchange yesterday, the donors don't want to believe that he's, quote, an asshat, unquote. He said, you know what, when Trump went there on the Freedom Caucus, though, this morning, that's where I got the idea that this line had been crossed, because this friend of mine said he crossed a line. He told me the texts and messages that he is getting from their donors now is completely different than what he was even getting 24 hours ago. That Trump really outkicked his coverage here, and his reach has exceeded his grasp. What do you think?
Well, of course, I don't know who you're referring to, and there's a lot of groups that will kowtow to Trump and will keep silent because they care more about growing their group. So if more people are waking up, then that's a good sign.
Todd?
This is nothing short of pharisaical. Everything about this. I mean, we're at the point where Jesus is getting trolled by them, and he says, okay, tell me who the John the Baptist is. Well, if you say he's a prophet, well, then this and this. And if you don't say he's a prophet, then the mountains. This is where, get with the Lord, okay? I mean this metaphorically speaking, in the political context. You know, the entire tree is rotten. There is no healthy fruit on it. There is not a solid limb to stand on. This entire thing is a farce, and whatever answer is coming out of the establishment's mouth is a lie or a dodge or a scam. Have I said enough?
Well, let's be fair here, Aaron. You know, I mean,
Really?
Yes, we need to be fair. We believe in telling the truth here on this show, even when it comes from people we don't particularly think are all that truthful or have let us down in the past. The truth is its own reward, right? So let's put this out there. Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity, Lou Dobbs are a few individuals who I would argue have been rightfully panned by numerous conservatives for their behavior since the original emergence of Trumpism. But each of them in the last week have all been very critical of Trump's approach here.
And you might even throw Ann Coulter into that
I would
mix
throw Ann Coulter into
as
that
well.
mix too. Thank you for noting her. Now you've still got Rush Limbaugh on his show celebrating the fact that Trump is going after conservatives. But the other four people I just mentioned, who are known Trump shills and water carriers, they did draw a line in the sand on this week, and I think that's something worth noting. And I mean, if you're losing Lou Dobbs, it's reminiscent of the old line that you're too young for. But it's when Lyndon Johnson was once asked, why did you resign rather than seek re-election? And he said, you know what, when I lost Walter Cronkite, I lost the war. Talking about Vietnam. You can make the same analogy here. When you lose Lou Dobbs and your name's Donald Trump, I mean, you're in a tailspin, aren't you?
Yeah, you absolutely are. At least those types of people who said, well, we can keep Trump accountable, they're at least they're trying to live up to their side of the bargain when they said that, even though they're still not able to do that because they don't obviously have the clout to do that at this point anyway. But yeah, I mean that is fair. There are some I've noticed who have drawn that line in the sand, and that's a very good thing, and that needs to be encouraged. But it's like if our country, again, I tend to look at the macro picture. If our country really is under judgment or Romans 1 judgment, this is Daddy coming home, getting his belt out. Right now, I think we've lost governing privileges because our heart is just that out of sorts with how or who we are supposed to be and how we should be living. It's like God has given or taken away our governing privileges from us because it's obvious we don't know how to do it.
And Kim, let's look at who is doing the governing now, right? So Trump's original campaign was set up by a guy I'm still good friends with, Sam Nunberg, who is an absolute 100% hardcore conservative. Nunberg lost a power struggle with Corey Lewandowski, who's a known knuckle dragger, and he ran the show until his knuckles dragged a little bit too low, like pushing women reporters around, and who was brought in was a guy that is literally a paid Putin stooge who actually helped Gerald Ford rig the '76 convention against Ronald Reagan, Paul Manafort. That was who was brought in to save the campaign. Now they're claiming he was Rectum barely knew him, is what they're saying now. I mean, Sean Spicer up there saying, we didn't even know. And Paul Manafort, who's that? I mean, is that it back on the bumper guys? I mean, we don't know who that guy is. Now, after that blew up in their face, they actually brought in people like David Bossie, Kellyanne Conway, people that have actually have some conservative resumes, have done some things in the grassroots, in the movement. They righted the ship. They helped this guy get elected. Bossie, do you even know where he's at?
No.
We don't even know where, I couldn't even tell you where David Bossie is. Kellyanne Conway, they used up all her credibility in the first month of the presidency. She's disappeared. The only one of that triumvirate that remains is Steve Bannon. And at this point, and Bannon's the guy that went up to the Freedom Caucus last week and tried yelling at him in their caucus room.
Right.
At this point, I would take Steve Bannon being an alt-right nationalist. That would be an upgrade over what we are currently seeing. And now who is the inner circle? The inner circle is Jared and Ivanka, known liberals. The inner circle's Reince Priebus, okay? The inner circle is Mike Pence, who seems like a decent human being, all right? And genuinely a conservative guy ideologically and in his personal life. But when it comes to actually courageously standing for those principles, has shown repeatedly in the last couple of years, courage is not necessarily, politically anyway, political courage is not necessarily his thing. And Bannon, who's essentially a craven opportunist, that is the inner circle. So tell me, unless there is a serious shakeup of that inner circle, what hope is there here for conservatives, Kim?
There's absolutely no hope in them. And I think that's the message that we've been trying to get out, even during the election process. It is not in man, first of all, and it is not in this group. And I want to say something about Mike Pence, okay? Thank you for valuing your marriage and your wife. I greatly admire that. But you're right, his political courage is next to nothing.
So, Todd, here we are. Then we're 70 days into this. And already, essentially, everything's been abandoned that we were sold on or promised for the last year and a half. And if you look, the people at Heritage who helped plan this transition for Trump, he's thrown them all under the bus. We've mentioned who's in the inner circle. We've mentioned how they're trying to essentially single out the Freedom Caucus as if they were the only people that didn't want Rhino Care that 83% of Americans didn't support. We were told that we had to go down this road with a guy who wasn't a conservative because he had the personality to blow up the paradigm and return the power back to the people. That's clearly not going to happen. I think that's obvious now. Are we at the point then where we should now have a serious, and not a lamentable or I wish we could do this or I'm fed up. No, we're adults now. And we just have to, we have to accept this marriage cannot be saved. That remaining in it now is making both parties worse people. That remaining in it essentially drives more enmity between the two. It turns both sides into people they don't want to be. And it's time to divorce.
Yeah.
It's just time to walk away. I got a text from a buddy of mine today who's like, man, who's congressman who was in the Freedom Caucus actually abandoned him and voted for RhinoCare. He goes, this guy's a good friend of mine. I helped him get elected. I'm so disappointed. Would he be disappointed, though, if they weren't both Republicans? No, he'd disagree with him vehemently. But would he be personally disappointed? Would he feel like this buddy of mine stabbed me in the back? No. Do you feel that way when Charles Schumer does Charles Schumer things? Do you feel stabbed in the back by that?
No.
Do you feel stabbed in the back when Dianne Feinstein does Dianne Feinstein things?
No.
No. You know they're not with you, right? Which meant if you saw them at a pub and there was a game on, as long as you didn't talk politics, you could probably belly up to the
Right.
bar and say, "Hey,
That's
that was,"
exactly
and
right.
have a normal human conversation, right? But if it was one of these guys that had sold you out that helped get elected, could you do that?
No.
No,
Never.
No, you'd be too
Never.
ticked off.
Yeah.
That's my point. I think it's not even about them and treachery and betrayal. I think now for our own good, our own integrity as human beings, I just think we have to walk away and just do our own thing, diffuse the tension in the room, stop asking people to do what they clearly don't want to or can't do or just don't have the wherewithal for, and just do our own thing and say, God bless you. You know what? See you at the game. You know, we'll have a beer. But clearly we just can't be in this level of alignment together.
Yeah, and it should be as easy as ever now if you stop and think about it. I mean, what has not been tried? We've hit Control-Alt-Delete so many times, and well, let's hope against hope one more time. It's not going to work. So it should be easier than ever before. And the other simple fact of the matter is, out of these ashes, something is going to rise. For good or for bad, something's going to rise. It may as well be us.
Agreed.
We may well be the ones that totally change the playing field and make whatever comes of politics and whatever we hand on to our children. And as you talk about, see, your daughter has her driver's license. Handing that baton off isn't as far away as we think it is. We may as well be the one that resets the deck. We may as well be the one, as you say in your book, Rules for Patriots, go on offense.
Well, we've already blown one opportunity. In this last election cycle, we had a golden opportunity. Instead of picking an actual conservative, we picked a con man whose ideology was at best murky, and now we're reaping the whirlwind for that already 70 days into this. I think you're right. Eventually, someone is going to be smart and say, there's too much dissatisfaction. I'm going to create an alternative, if for no other reason to cash in. At some point, I'd like us to be the alternative, rather than to be the banana in the tailpipe folks. On the receiving end, we're the tailpipe taking the banana. Aaron, you get the last word.
I think before we start talking about walking away and what that looks like, the best thing that and we've had this type of conversation before, but the best thing that I can boil this down to is everyone has to divorce their identity from any political party. And this happens with any political party. People just identify with it. It's part of who they are. Instead, we have to find and start looking at parties as a vehicle for our beliefs. And right now, I'm not totally sure that the vast majority of people who call themselves conservatives are ready to do that.
All right, exit question. Right now, Trump's approval rating is right around 38%. 1 month from now, on the final day of April, will it be higher or lower than that, Aaron?
Lower.
Todd?
Lower.
Kim?
Lower.
The answer is lower. And it's not because of ideology. It's because he looks like a weak leader. Issue 2. Should they try again?
Yeah, I don't know what else to say other than Obamacare is the law of the land. It's going to remain the law of the land until it's replaced. We did not have quite the votes to replace this law.
After saying that, numerous sources in Washington have said in recent days healthcare reform is back on the table. But members of the Moderate Tuesday group have said they have no desire to work with the House Freedom Caucus on crafting a new bill. That, combined with Paul Ryan's tepid attitude towards the issue, means Obamacare could very well be the law of the land till it explodes.
First question to you, Todd. Should they try again? Yes or no? I ask you.
First, who's they? The collective?
Your elected officials.
Yes, because so much of the fundamental existence of our nation depends on it. As you talked about earlier this week, Steve, you know, Obamacare, its tentacles reach into so many different, religious freedom, the economy, things like that. I think you had 6 bullet points.
Yeah, I mean, there's
that
even
it affected.
there's a gun control aspect of Obamacare. There's The Hobby Lobby and Catholic nun lawsuits
Right.
stem from Obamacare. It's the biggest legislative proponent of infanticide that's ever come out of the United States government. Those are just three. That's not even counting what it does to your health care, what it does to your premiums, your costs. It essentially is an all-encompassing Leviathan.
So this goes back to the previous issue about starting a new party. My thinking on this is so paradoxical, and that's why I paused. Yes, because it matters so much, but simultaneously I'm thinking no just as strongly is because they don't care. It does not mean the same thing to them as it means to us. And so if it's just a big parlor trick and ultimately isn't really about addressing those things, why go through the motions at all?
Aaron, what do you think?
I think at this point, no. Do not try this again. And here's why. We've already seen, and we've talked about this, we just had this conversation a little bit in the last segment. It's not that they're just bad, that Republicans in the House and in the Senate are just bad or are stupid. They're not. They just don't agree with us. And so our definition of conservatives, actual conservatives, about what is right is not their definition. So how would we expect them to be even capable of doing the right thing, whatever that thing is? They're not capable of doing it because their definition of right is not the same as ours. As we've seen in the last couple of weeks, their solution, their repeal and replace solution, is no different. In fact, it's worse than Obamacare. So why the hell would we want them to mess around with this anymore? They're not capable of it. They've already shown that. And if anything, I think it would be worse.
All right, I want to come back to the point you just made, Aaron, in a moment, but Kim, you're next.
Well, I want the Freedom Caucus to continue to fight. I want them to be out front on this issue. I want them to go in, to anybody, even Hannity, I don't care who it is, go on there and be out front on this issue. This is something that they've promised, and I think this is the time to strike. When you know that Donald Trump is looking very weak, you know that the American public is watching what's going on, I think this is the time you just double down and keep delivering the promise.
Aaron, the point that you made about why you don't want them to try again, because these are this is a party that is just led by people that just you don't believe share our values, and I agree with that. Now you got Trump out there saying he's going to negotiate with Democrats. Good luck with that. They're not going to negotiate. They have no incentive to. I mean, the Democratic Party stood there in the last 4 election cycles with this calamity coming down the pike and just stood their ground, even in the face of political ruin. They lost over 900 elections because of Obamacare, didn't blink once. Why? Because it's doing what it's supposed to do, destabilize the system to bring us one step closer to the Valhalla the Democratic Party has sought for 50 plus years, which is single-payer health care. They're not going to negotiate at all. I mean, if they didn't try to negotiate a fix when they were facing political ruin, why would they do it now when they have no political incentive whatsoever? And Republicans are openly standing up and saying, "Hey, we'd like to take the blame for the mess you guys made. Put it on us. We're going to take all the blame for it. It's all on us." They're not going to fix this at all. Trump's just again way out of his depth here. But that notwithstanding, the point that you were making, Aaron, I think this goes back to the conversation we ended the last segment with. At some point in a relationship, if you keep putting out for a guy, and he keeps promising you he's going to marry you, and then he never does. Now, is he responsible for not keeping his word? Of course, he's responsible for that, right?
Well, if he lied and said he was going to marry
Sure,
you,
but
right.
at some point, when you let him lie to you, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, or 15 times you hopped into bed with him, okay? This is the time he was going to marry you. All those times he lied to you, is he accountable for his actions that he's a liar? Yes. But at what point in time, time 4, time 9, time 28, time 39, time 65, time 78, time 112, at what time that you jumped into bed with a guy who had lied to you all those other times about putting a ring on it and didn't do it again, at what point do you have a responsibility on your end, Kim, to look in the mirror and say, you know what, okay, I'm playing the fool here. And
Right.
after a while, I just need to walk away. And yes, you're responsible for what you did, but really, I can't be mad at you because I just set myself up to let you do this to me over and over and over again. And that's what I hear Aaron saying right now.
Right. There's clearly grounds for divorce. I mean, there's been unfaithfulness, and I've left the Republican Party because of it.
Aaron, does that sort of speak to where you're at?
Yeah, I think so. At what point do we just say this is I mean, again, yesterday I said this, and I meant it at a political level and not a human level. I thought about it afterwards. At a human level, these people have souls and they have families, but at a political level, most of the people in the Republican Party for most of my life are just dead to me politically. They serve no use whatsoever. That sounds cold, that sounds callous, and again, I mean that strictly in a political sense, but they're dead to me. They're useless. They're absolutely useless.
You know what's really pathetic? We're the God and Guns party movement, what have you. But when it comes right down to us, and you analyze how we keep coming back, how many times over, we just have battered wife syndrome. We just won't leave. No matter
Stockholm
what they
syndrome.
do to us, we won't
Yeah.
leave. We're terrified little children. We're not bold. We're not. I mean, yeah, we'll flash that Second Amendment thing around and all that rhetoric, and we'll talk about God being sovereign over our lives. We don't believe it. We don't believe
You don't
it at
act
all.
it out. You don't live it out.
Having lived that as a child, there's a lot of truth to it. It was interesting as I got older, my mom and I would end up arguing with each other after beatings. We would argue with each other because we take turns. One person after a beating would, that's it, this is the last straw, we have to leave. And the other person would be like, where would we go? There's nowhere else to go. I mean, we live in a nice house, we take nice
We have
vacations.
food.
Yeah, right. I
Yeah.
mean, it's the lesser of two evils. And then the next time, the one that was making the lesser of two evil argument would be the one, that's it, we got to draw the line, we got to get out of here. And the other one would be the one and we would just do this dance, this tango. Back and forth, my mom and I, we would just argue with each other, taking turns about who's going to take which side. And then finally you realize that ultimately, yeah, I mean, is Dave responsible for the times he's hit your mom or hit you or your brother? Well, yeah. But at what point are you responsible for standing up and saying, thank you, sir, may I have another? At what point are you responsible for going back again and again? At what point are you responsible for looking the other way because, damn, that Cedar Point vacation we took last year was a blast, man. Or that time that I came home from 8th grade, the last day of school, and Dave said, hey, tomorrow, full blast, we're going out to California, every amusement park. And that's why he did that stuff, because that would keep you hanging around, right? So just when they sell you out on something that really matters, they'll do something like repeal a few EPA regulations the other day. So they just get done stabbing you in the heart. You got a bleeding wound right here in your chest called Obamacare, and that's when they walk up and say, you know what, we could have taped that sprained ankle that day one we took over, but we're going to go ahead and time it out today so that you'll think, well, we're still getting something. These guys aren't that bad. I played this game before. It's what you described, Todd. It's called my childhood. I lived this once already.
And so either we are the people we say we are, or we continue to be a laughingstock that can't get anything done politically. Listen, the Republican Party, short of the personality of Donald Trump, is dead. We also figured that out. Really, once he moves on and does whatever he's going to do, I think this is a carcass anyways. I mean, we really have no choice. I mean, that's where things are, which is why I said before, it's as easy as ever. We've been backed up as far as we can to the wall.
Oh, you would think.
Except we just keep bursting through the wall.
Exactly.
And then this is the new wall. This is the new line that we won't cross.
See, what-
And then we just smudge it out. No, it's this one. No,
This
now
one.
if you do this to us, man, we're done.
That's
You know,
it.
It's funny. I remember sitting in a church in suburban Des Moines not too many years ago. It was about 4 years ago. Listening to Mike Huckabee come in and give a fire and brimstone speech. And if this party won't defund Planned Parenthood, if they're not going to be a pro-life party, he said, I'm going to be the first one leading the revolt outside the door. And a packed house at this massive mega church in suburban Des Moines got up and everybody said, yeah, and applauded. And, he's the first one as you try to escape. He's one of the first people now that guards the door, locks it, says you hate Jesus if you want to walk out, right before those arguments, right? And half of the people that were in that auditorium that day cheering were the ones that went on our Facebook walls and said, well, if you don't want to vote for this guy, you just hate America.
And you love Hillary.
And you love Hillary,
Yes.
and you just, and there's a special place in hell for you.
Yeah.
But you know what, though? As much as that disappoints me and frustrates me, I'm not angry, though, because I understand it. Because I did this. I did this with my own childhood. And Dave's abuse at times ended up pitting all of us who were the ones being abused against each other. Because depending on who was the one that wanted to take the principled stand and walk out, the other two would turn on that person, or vice versa. And so we never, ever had a united front with all three of us growing up, my brother, my mom, and me, because we constantly, one of us was always beaten down into submission to him at all times. It wasn't until he was an adult, and finally he didn't want to take care of my mom when she got sick, that he walked away on his own, that we were actually relieved of this dysfunction. But we didn't have the temerity on our own to walk out of the room. I think that's probably why I had the temerity to walk out of this room,
Right.
because I recognized what was going on, because I lived this already. And that's where you get, I had a gentleman on my Facebook wall yesterday. All I ever see you do is write negative, 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 negative. I wrote back to him, I said, tell me what I've said that's not true. Because I don't want to write negative, because all my Never Trump friends were yelling at me the first month he was president, saying I've totally sold out, because everything I was writing was positive, positive, positive. So tell me what I'm saying that's not true. Well, it's not that it's not true, I just don't want to hear negative all the time.
Well, that's a you problem.
I can't deal, I can't fix that. If you don't want to hear the truth, then first of all, I don't know why you're coming to my Facebook wall anyway. If you just want to have your belly rubbed, I don't know is that the brand we put out there? I mean, I think we have some semblance of a reputation. This is not the place to come and be told with the thumb in your mouth everything's going to be okay, right? That's just not what we do. So that's on you to begin with. But when you don't want to hear it, that means there's nothing I can do for you at that point, right? We're done.
Right.
All right, exit question. Will there be an Obamacare repeal bill, fake or otherwise, put on Trump's desk by the end of this year, Todd?
A real repeal
Fake
bill?
or otherwise?
Fake or otherwise?
Yeah.
Yes.
Aaron?
By the end of this year, no.
Yes. Kim?
Yes.
Answer's no. I don't think there will be. They're working like 9 days total in April. We'll get into May, June, or July. They'll want to get into tax reform, something they think that polls better. Although repealing Obamacare polled pretty well, like 900 elections in the last 8 years.
Right.
But they're going to try to move on to something they think will be easier. They'll get more unity on, and then they'll muck that up, of course. And then we'll get into fall, and who knows what world events and stuff will be going on. And maybe about then they'll come around to trying to do it seriously again. But then you'll come up to the holidays and breaks, and we'll be into next year. So I think the answer is no, we will not. Issue 3. This is what political persecution looks like.
David Daleiden of the Center for Medical Progress is facing 15 felonies in California for his work in exposing Planned Parenthood and their under-the-table business of selling dead baby body parts. In a statement, Daleiden said that this attempt at prosecution would go the same way as charges against him in Houston, Texas, where he was eventually found not guilty of similar accusations. California Attorney General Javier Becerra, the man responsible for bringing these charges against Daleiden, has accepted thousands of dollars in donations from Planned Parenthood in his former job as a congressman for the state of California. After these latest charges cropped up, right on cue, the Center for Medical Progress released yet another video.
They come out looking like a baby. We have the people who do our paperwork for the fetal death certificate. They email us calling them baby. Baby this, baby that, baby so-and-so. And I'm like, that's crazy.
The fight against Planned Parenthood and abortion is not ending anytime soon.
So we like to throw certain terms around, and I get concerned that we use them so often that they lose their meaning and their weight and their gravitas for when the moment truly has arrived. So I'm calling this political persecution. Is that pretty much exactly what this is, Kim? Am I overstating it, or am I underselling it even?
There's a lot to it. I mean, I do think it's persecution. I think it's political. I think it's an example to be made so that it keeps all the pro-life people in line. This too shall happen to you. We will be coming after you. And of course, I think a bigger ramification would be for journalists. What, every undercover journalist now can worry about prosecution and have, these felonies? So it's much broader. It's much worse than you can imagine.
No, Todd. Not every journalist has to worry about having these charges brought to them unless they are attacking one of progressivism's civil sacraments, which is two dudes sodomizing each other into the dead of night, or killing unborn children with bloodthirsty zeal. Do anything other than those two things to expose any other evil or injustice, and I think you're perfectly fine.
Oh, I know that from direct experience. What really drives me nuts about this, you remember Bobby Jindal, one of the greatest examples during when he was running, but he went back to Louisiana, and he there was a bill regarding Planned Parenthood, but he was defunding it in the state. That's what it was. and he had protesters out front of the State House, so he put up a big screen
And
just
made him watch
That's
those
right.
videos.
Made him watch those videos. Here, that's the governor of Louisiana right now. If Donald Trump was any kind of a man who really was anything resembling a conservative and pro-life, as he told us over and over and over again, he would make that look like rinky-dink nonsense with Bobby Jindal. That guy would have called a press conference at prime time, 7 o'clock at night, and he would have run that tape that we just watched. And he said, "Enough, America. These are the ghouls who are killing babies. They're smiling about it. They're laughing about it. No, yeah, we all believe they're babies when they're 2 months old, 2 weeks old. But there's a living baby on a table breathing. They're like, as long as there's nobody in the room that gives a damn, that thing's dead." Donald Trump, President Trump, you are a coward for not doing that and saying over and over and over again that you are pro-life. You are not. You have lost on this opportunity. The Kleins up in Oregon, you lost on that opportunity. You are not a conservative. You are not a Republican. This is yet another example of why you are a fraud and a failure.
Aaron,
This is another one of those instances where the Babylon Bee, the Christian satire site, is dead on the money.
maybe the best website not paying me
Exactly.
in America right now.
Exactly. Yeah. This is. I mean, there were 2 stories that came out in recent weeks. One was miraculous clump of cells miraculously becomes human baby upon exit from the womb, and then another headline that they ran as well, where it was talking about the Attorney General of California saying that it's not okay for undercover videos to show Planned Parenthood, but it is okay for, PETA to go undercover and show abuse to animals. It's things like that where, again, this is what we are up against. We are up against a brain-numbed, a morally numbed. There are
Hearts are hardened.
Hearts are
Consciences
hardened.
are seared.
If there are consciences, if there are hearts behind this front that they put off, I'm starting to believe that the left in this country has no conscience. And I, to some extent, I already believe that because it's showing up in so many ways. This is what we are up against as Christians, as followers of Christ in this country, and we need to put on the armor of God, literally and figuratively as well, when we go into these types of arenas. David Daleiden is, I think, a true example of what that looks like.
This, though, if you look at the long arc of history, and I say this not having to be the one in David Daleiden's shoes, not having to be the one that hopes again conservative legal representation with some credibility and skill will pro bono represent me like what happened before, knowing that, it's a big difference getting my case thrown out in Texas than it is taking these people on in the People's Republic of California, okay? So I don't want what I'm about to say to be trite. I wanted to say this up front to recognize that these are extraordinary circumstances that Daleiden and his bunch are now facing. But they're circumstances that also every earnest, true social reformer has faced. I mean, maybe Martin Luther King Jr.'s greatest work was written from a Birmingham jail cell. All right, there is a moment where you do have to stand up to the system and say, here I stand, I can do no more, may God have mercy on my soul. Do your worst and bring it, okay? And that's pretty much been his reaction to this week that I've seen. With that disclaimer, though, out of the way, here's where I think, if you look at the long arc of history, here's why this is good news. Whenever tyranny, evil, wickedness, and oppression, whenever they do open persecutions, open martyring now, that is always the last violent, oppressive gasp of their time. That's always at the end. Because when they're riding high, when they have the power, when they're on the offensive and they don't feel like they're on the defensive, you don't exist. Or they can squash you in the dead of night and it was like your daddy wore a condom that night. It was like you never existed, right? When they have to openly come after you in such an openly and obvious ham-fisted tyrannical way, when they have to declare an open and obvious persecution, when they have to make martyrs. See, tyrants don't like to make martyrs. Why? Because martyrs become heroes. They are far more dangerous dead than they were ever alive. You look at the apostles of the church. Their works have lived on for centuries. They were far more dangerous to the bowels of hell as martyrs who could no longer be corrupted and had accepted their reward in heaven than they were as still fleshly beings prone to weakness or temptation from this world. This is always, guys, historically, this is the last gasp of a dying oppression and tyranny. Now, it's also the least fun. It's also the most violent. It's also the most tyrannical, the most oppressive. But traditionally, if you look at the long arc of history, Todd and Kim, this is usually the last gasp of wickedness.
It is, as long as there is a remnant who's willing to show the world that they are willing to undertake a level of suffering that has not been seen before on behalf of the good. I mean, you've mentioned MLK. The same is true of Gandhi. I mean, peaceful non-resistance ultimately is a tactic for a particular moment in time. That moment you're talking, we can break them right now if we have the courage to take this beating. The problem is, our remnant, and we've just got done talking about, how much courage do we have? What beating are we willing to take? I mean, we are so ensconced in our comfort. Are we willing to put ourselves on the line like David Daleiden is? I mean, that's the next step in giving the spirit back into the church, in creating whatever new party we'd like to create. We all need to be willing and able to suffer more. And right now, I don't see that. So that's the only caveat I throw onto what you're talking about. I mean, if we just like getting rolled.
Well,
but I would say, Kim, that caveat has always existed.
Yeah, I mean, God is faithful, and there is always going to be a remnant. So, but I get what you're saying. There's so many Christians that I've worked with in the political arena that are so fear-based.
Yes.
It's almost at that point where I'm like, please, get behind me, because I can't deal with that kind of fear that's going to hold me back, right? So there will always be a remnant. And it's always a matter of examining your heart. Are you ready?
And I think a lot of times we don't know if we're ready until the moment like this comes.
True.
And I think probably every previous generation of history that has faced these kinds of moments had this exact conversation, right?
Yes.
And ultimately, I think that, I've given this sermon at our home church numerous times. And I've asked them, I've asked the people in our pews, are you ready? Do you think you're ready for what is coming? And and there's silence. I said, here, let me give you some good news. If you're not sure, you're going to find out. Because evil's great lie is that you can have good and evil next to one another. See, the light says, I don't want to share things with the dark, but the dark originally will say, we're fine sharing things with the light, until the dark has the advantage over the light. And then you'll find they want to share even less than the light does. And that is the era we are entering into now. So if you're not sure, if you don't think, if whether you can cut the mustard, whether you've got what it takes, the good news is, everybody watching this right now who has any righteousness in them at all, you're going to get that question answered, because you're going to be tested. There is no amount of accommodation of your belief system or values that the other side is going to permit, because the eradication of your belief system and values are its goal. So there will be no accommodation. You will all, every last one of you watching this, I promise you, you will all, one day soon even, have to choose ye this day. You will have to. You will not be able to avoid it. And it won't be people like me or the bringer of sunshine, Daniel Horowitz, or others. It won't be your lamentable wannabe modern day prophets that will force you into this corner. It will be the very system you have often surrendered to. You've looked the other way. You've accused people like us. We wanted to take the system on of being too radical, too puritanical, too hard-headed. We're not the ones that are forcing you into this sphere. It is the system you have often accommodated that will do it for you. And I just pray that when that moment comes for you, you haven't betrayed so many of us that you have to stand up there all by yourself. That's what there is to be worried about, Tom.
Wow. I like where you took that. We do need to consider how much we owe our fellow brethren. If we consider us part of a church properly understood, that we are called to something far more than we have given so far. Almost all of us do, man, and I include myself in that breath. And again, we are past the point of really having a choice in the matter. It's do or do not.
Exit question. Will David Daleiden spend a single day behind bars for these charges? Aaron?
No.
Kim?
No.
Todd?
Yes.
I think the answer is yes. It may be a single day. But the People's Republic of California is a different animal. That's a different nut to crack than taking these people on in Texas. We'll come back with predictions next. So after taking a look back, it is now time to spring forward. Predictions here on the Deace Group. And Kim, I'll begin with you.
Well, I've had many predictions about Kellyanne Conway, and this one I think is right on the money. She's ready to retire from the White House. She's ready to go a different way.
Aaron.
Finally, Gonzaga will actually live up to its high expectations and high rankings, and they will come away victorious after the Final Four and then the championship game. They will be the national champions.
Okay. Todd?
They're not even going to get to that game. South Carolina's going to beat them, and South Carolina is going to shock the world and win it all.
South Carolina will win the national championship in
Who'da
men's college
thunk?
basketball. At school, I think all time before this tournament had one NCAA tournament win all time, something like that. Not a lot. So that would be quite a story, no question about it. My prediction will be, unless Donald Trump radically alters course and changes the personnel within his inner sanctum, he is going to be his generation's Jimmy Carter. He will be the one-term Republican version of Jimmy Carter, where his presidency will be both a verb and an adjective to describe dysfunction and poor leadership for the next generation of American politics. That'll do it for the Deace Group Roundtable. Don't forget the audio podcast. We'll get to your feedback later today here at crtv.com. Until then, John 3:17.